But I just feel like, he's a good guy. All of my dealings with him, yes, he could be a little bit difficult at times, but I kind of enjoyed that and I respected what he was trying to do. And he clearly is a good guy. A lot of people behind the scenes all say exactly the same thing. A really good man, a gentleman. But, I think I did one of these videos when he was first being spoken to and it looked like he was going to be the manager. And I think I said then, and I unfortunately 4 months on still do stand by it, that it's just kind of the wrong guy in the wrong situation at the wrong club. It just, he never really ticked the boxes that Tottenham needed. And I think he was coming in as essentially, so far down the list of managers that they were looking at. He wasn't even on the original list before Paratici came in. And the fact that Paratici had to even convince Daniel Levy to appoint him in the first place, I kind of feel that maybe that all undermined him slightly from the start. And, the fact that his tactics didn't really align with the, free-flowing, entertaining, attacking football that Levy had promised the fans. He just kind of was on a losing wicket from the start. And it's just, I do feel for him. And I feel like some of the players once again did what they do, unfortunately, in that they just kind of maybe didn't show the fight and commitment required just to fight for him, I guess, towards the end. Obviously, I'm having to rely on kind of reports and chatting to my colleague, Robert Guest, who's been at the games this week, and he's been telling me exactly the same thing. That just certain players just were kind of going through the motions. But again, like I say, the tactics didn't... You can't you can't hide from the fact that that 18th, 19th in various things in the table in terms of chance creation. And it was just never there. It was the cohesion in the attacking stuff just wasn't there. And it was just, we were getting to the stage where it was a little bit like towards the end of the Mourinho tenure where, you could just feel you knew what was coming. It was a predictable kind of game was going to come. There were certain elements you knew you could expect. But whereas Mourinho, one of his big pluses and positives was that he was able to get the best out of Kane and Son. So he had their magic to kind of rely on. Nuno never really got that. And there's varying factors for that as well. But yeah, just never really kind of happened for him. And he didn't have that kind of get out of jail free card, as it were. And, I think the killer moment really for me when you kind of, this was what I was told shortly after the game, and I've had it confirmed by a couple of people, that just after Cavani scored the second goal for United on Saturday, Paratici apparently just was absolutely furious and he walked off away from his seat and didn't come back. And if he's the guy that kind of had your back, the whole director of football head coach system relies on that support and each other having each other's back, I guess. And that's how it works. I think if the sporting director is kind of just thinking, what is this? Then kind of the end was coming. And I think obviously tied into the fact that Conte, obviously they got some kind of positive noises from his camp again. That was it really. And I do, I always say it's not just about the manager. I always feel like the manager gets the roughest ride in these situations. Look, he made mistakes and the things he did that didn't help himself whatsoever, which I'm going to come to. But ultimately, again, the training was... I was told all the similar things that, you probably saw out there. I was told just in the last 24 hours or so that there was this kind of feeling that training sessions weren't geared enough towards preparation for the next match. And a lot of the bulk of preparation came in long, kind of up to almost 3-hour meetings in the team hotel or wherever they were, if it was an away game. In those 3 hours before a game, Nuno would rightly maybe point towards the fixture schedule and say, well, how do you do training preparation when you've barely got any training time between matches because there's constantly match. But yes, it's once again players complaining about training, whether indirectly through people around them. I've heard since Poch's time, I've heard training sessions are too hard. I've heard training sessions are too soft and not working them hard enough. I've heard training sessions have gone stale, and now there's this thing about preparation as well. It's like there's a part of you just want to say, get on with it. It's just I don't know. You maybe go down the weak mentality angle, perhaps, I don't know, but there's always an issue. And look, there were things that Nuno did that weren't great at all. Behind the scenes, from what I understand, actually players have told me this, and also people around them, that he's a very concise, to the point, blunt to a point, But certainly was not a man who would use a lot of words, and what he did use, he very much, bang, that's my point. That's the kind of thing that certain players like, and other players not so much. And that's when you do end up, I don't know, I kind of feel like managers maybe have to read and understand the player. You've got to know what pushes them and what doesn't. I do think maybe with the modern mentality, I don't know, one size doesn't fit all, and maybe that's ultimately what led to his undoing, because, I saw it before I went away, and what I'm told from everyone in the last 3 games, maybe obviously the 2 league games, you can tell that everyone wasn't fully up for the fight, to fight for Nuno, essentially. He alluded to it. I was reading this press conference ahead of the United game where he said, I wish all the players had equal commitment. What's his name? Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, after the match, I saw his interview where he was saying about, it didn't matter whether it was this cleaning lady was in charge, he'd give everything he had. And, he started to go off as if he was about to say about some people not being committed, and he said, I probably shouldn't say any more. And it's just, how many times are we going to hear that? I don't like that side of stuff. I don't like that when it happens in a football club. Even Poch, who had the most tight-knit family atmosphere, even in his last year, that was happening. You could see it on the pitch. You could see it with the lack of pressing. And I remember asking about pressing, and he was like, I'd like them to press more than they are. And that's a desire thing. But we'll come to Conte, and hopefully that's the kind of person that just won't stand for that. But we said that about Mourinho as well. So, as you can tell, I'm a guy that doesn't like to pin everything on one person, because I always believe if there's a success in a football club, it's down to a variety of reasons and factors. And I also believe failure is exactly the same. But, it's a shame because it started so well, didn't it? We had, I think his pre-season, from what I understand, his pre-season went down really well. And there was a lot of good stuff said by people around the club and players as well. He got them really fit, those non-international, the ones who didn't go off in their international competitions, got them really fit, and you could kind of see what he was trying to build. He had a really good first month, won Manager of the Month, beat the champions, Man City, Wolves and Watford as well, and you could kind of see where he was going. And obviously, he was walking, I've said this before, so I'm not going to harp on about it too much, but he was coming into a mess of a situation. He was coming into the Kane and Dembele scenarios where they both wanted to leave, and that's 2 big players. He then had an international break that robbed him of about 8 players or so, injuries, absences with red-listed countries, everything. So, he didn't have much going for him whatsoever, and he was kind of battling, constantly firefighting as well. But he never then really pushed on after that. There was the odd little kind of flickers of something. And look, I'd never, ever, ever advocate for someone getting sacked. That's just not my style. I don't like that. I'm not that kind of person. But I think after everything I've heard about Saturday's match, and people that were there have kind of reported back to me and said it was the most toxic atmosphere of a game in the new stadium since it got constructed. And I think with that, with Paratici walking off, there was probably no way back. And, players not being fully behind him, that's unfortunately, it's kind of what's going to happen. I always felt with Nuno, I understood that he was a guy that didn't enjoy the media side of things, and he didn't enjoy, having really any attention on him whatsoever. But the problem was, and I know people behind the scenes at Spurs were trying to explain this to him, that at a club like Tottenham, which is a little bit different to Wolves, there's more spotlight, there's more pressure from the fans, I'd say. And the key thing of what the media do allow you to do is to get your message across. And the problem with Nuno is I don't really believe he had a message to get across. And that's, that sounds like something that shouldn't be a big deal. But ultimately, when you're coming in as, 27th choice or whatever he was, patronising slightly there. Of course, he wasn't 27th choice, but in Paratici's, even with Paratici's list, we know he wasn't in those top choices. He was very much a kind of almost a reserve choice. And if you're coming into that scenario, you've got to kind of win everyone over, and you've got to come across as inspiring. And the problem is, if in your press conferences you're just coming out with generic non-answers to questions, then kind of you just wonder whether he was like that behind the scenes as well. And when he's talking to the players and you want him to inspire them. And was he, by the sounds of it and by the proof on the pitch? Unfortunately, the answer is probably no. There were so many opportunities I tried to give him in press conferences to say things kind of that I knew would help him out as well. There were moments where I was asking about that attacking football and saying, look, but surely you're building towards that attacking football. And he'd say things like, oh, I wish I could be honest. I'm always honest. I wish I could say that. And it's like, no, don't say that. At least show. And I think this was maybe Nuno's other biggest problem, is that he never really found his way of playing, because I think there's a way of playing that Nuno wanted to play, and I think there's a way of playing that everyone else wanted him to play. And it kind of ended up being this ugly hybrid of the two that just didn't serve anyone any purpose whatsoever. You know, they weren't really solid at the back apart from that first month of the season. And then they didn't really have any attacking threat to them in games, you know, other than the ones against maybe European opposition at home where you'd expect them to create lots of chances. I'm just thinking about his press conferences and how just some of the national media were just, you could tell, it didn't even really, there was almost no point in being in the press conferences because the answers were so generic. Once in a while he'd suddenly open up and say something that was really interesting, but they were so few and far between. And that's the thing as well. And if you're not engaging the media will give you less time as well. It's just an unfortunate natural fact. And if the fans are reading stuff that they're just going like, then they're not going to give you any time when you already weren't probably the person they wanted. It's like, you know, it's not to say that there's any real importance to our job whatsoever, other than trying to, you know, ask the questions for the people. That's what we try to do. And if the fans aren't reading anything remotely inspiring, then they are going to turn quickly. And that's what happened. Here we are, 4 months in. You know, again, though, like I say, didn't help himself. Tactics just didn't work. You know, he kept talking about partnerships and, you know, combinations and how they just weren't working, and he was trying to make them work. They just never did. I don't think he really found his best 11 until late on. And then that best 11 didn't work for him. So it didn't end up even being his best 11. You know, I think you can tell in my voice, I'm gutted for Nuno. I'm gutted it didn't work for him. You know, and this is hopefully the way you see I operate. You know, in that video way back when he was first being spoken of and spoken to, you know, I made it clear that I didn't really feel he was a good fit, but I still hope to succeed. And especially when you're dealing with people on a face-to-face basis, you know, and you kind of get to know them a little bit, you really do hope they succeed. But you could just see it just wasn't clicking, it wasn't working, and it wasn't gelling whatsoever. But, you know, ultimately, as I say, it's not about one man, and there's a much more system, you know, it's systematic failure as well, in that if you're having to sack a manager after 4 months, and we're not talking about, you know, a huge super club that, you know, there's enormous expectations. So if you're not even top of the table, then you're getting sacked quickly. This is Tottenham, and they're not that kind of club right now. And if 4 months in, and I still think, you know, they were within touching distance of the top four still.